So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Pure Digital Passion Podcast with me, Moses Kemibaro. Today, we're joined by the founder who's rewriting the script of what it means to build a career in Kenya and Africa. Anuj Tanna is the co-founder and CEO of Mesh, a platform that he calls the first social media for the hustle economy. His story is compelling, not just because of the incredible scale of this venture, but now they're serving over 1 million young entrepreneurs here in Kenya, but also for his personal journey. A third generation East African who grew up with the entrepreneurial roots, he pursued his education in Canada only to make the reverse journey back to Kenya, driven by a conviction that the future was being built right here in Kenya and Africa. He argues that the universal career script of get a degree, get a job is broken, especially when 95% of young Kenyans earn their income in the informal economy. Instead of seeing a crisis, Anuj saw an engine, a $539 million opportunity to drive the economy through and with young hustlers. Today, we're going to get into the mind of the man who decided to fix that engine, but also to fuel it. So please, thank you so much for joining us, Anuj, and welcome to the Pure Digital Passion Podcast.
Thanks so much. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, great. So, Anuj, you're a third generation East African. Your parents moved from Canada to expand your horizons as a family, yet you made the reverse journey back to Kenya after university. This typically seems to be going against the grain of the universal career script you often talk about. Can you take us inside that decision, and why did you see in Kenya that was more compelling than the opportunities in North America?
Yes, I think for me, there were a few factors contributing to that, but it was a deeply personal one. So in my own personal experience has been, I've always been really passionate about economic development. I've been really passionate about specifically business and technology as a tool for driving development and solving big pressing challenges. I was, fascinated by microfinance and some of the innovations happening in East Africa, specifically in mobile money. And I really felt like I needed to just get my hands on it. And I thought, there's huge innovation, huge opportunity, big leapfrog moments happening in financial services and in technology and development. And so I decided to come back and really sort of fueled by passion and an interest in that sector.
Great. And again, what are the lessons you got from the formal sector? Before Mesh, you spent over 6 years at Telkom Kenya, one of our major telco networks in the country. You are deeply involved in mobile financial services like Orange Money, and your role really, included developing services for the base of the pyramid or the bottom of the pyramid, as it's called. So, what are the key limitations or frustrations you encountered when trying to apply formal financial products to the mass market? And what is the specific insight from that experience that became the seed for Mesh?
It's an excellent question. There were a couple, and I think one is we realized like the power users of mobile money, the individuals who were really driving and needing it the most, were often young people in the informal sector, building and growing businesses. And for all the benefits of mobile money, payments, transfers, etc., there was often like these additional services they needed: access to capital, access to savings. And it was very difficult to provide those services because oftentimes, these individuals wouldn't have a full history to be able to provide those services to them. So whether it was you were looking to provide those services yourself or you were looking to partner with a bank, it was a long journey of being able to sort of, build and trust an individual and build their reputation and history with you before you could actually give them these services that were big unlockers for value. I think the other thing was that, we saw that this generation and this demographic running all kinds of businesses weren't just consumers, but for us as a corporate, they were key points in our value chain. So every young entrepreneur running a kiosk, or every young entrepreneur running a cyber or a hair salon or any of these types of businesses, they were points of distribution, mobile money agents, SIM selling outlets, finding them, onboarding them, all these types of things to bring them into your kind of ecosystem was a really expensive structure. You could see them when you looked around outside, but to actually really reach them in an efficient, targeted way was a challenge. And I think the last thing for us was, even looking at mobile financial services, but even other services, mobile for development tools, M-Agri, M-Health. I think one of the core insights for Mesh was that we often found, for either for ourselves or for our partners, we were building services to digitize and almost replace the behavior happening in the market, right? So let's say it's a micro insurance product. Oftentimes that like flies in the face of existing ways that people mitigate risk or, pool their cash together to fundraise and these types of things. And I think there was a real understanding of, you know, there's so much energy and there's so much happening in the informal economy as existing systems. How do we complement it rather than try and replace it? And a lot of these ideas together form the underlying insights to build Mesh, this community for young people in the informal sector.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, I mean, what I'm hearing is that there are these additional adjacencies and complementaries that were part of a much bigger picture that when you sort of connected the dots, really then form the underpinning idea or concept for Mesh, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic.
100%.
So I had an opportunity to watch your TED Talk. Very inspiring, very insightful. It's very almost counterintuitive to what everyone has been saying around this space. And you really talked about this whole universal career script, that young people are meant to go to university or, get a diploma or degree, get a job and sort of move into the spaces of, the typical work career. But you and I know that, in the typical sense today, there are very, very few jobs out for young people, even those who are credentialed in that manner to actually get opportunities. And really, it sounds to me like, this was sort of a crisis for you. You had a perspective shift. And I want to sort of, walk through that aha moment when the narrative in your head flipped into this idea of how do you take this jobless generation, as they're known, to become a powerful economic engine, contributing over $539 million a month in Kenya alone, which is a staggering number because, for most people, they'll be like, are you kidding me? Is that really how big it is? Because it just sounds like an incredible number.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there was a single aha moment. I think it was a steady progression through a series of work and insights. I think both from myself and also my co-founder, who's had a lot of experience in this space as well, working with young people. I think, when we look at those numbers, 1 million new job seekers entering the job market every year in Kenya, 70,000 jobs created annually, right? It does look like a crisis. I think the personal belief that I've held for a very long time is, and I think this is not a new model, is that people look at bottom up solutions as being the solution. Microfinance has been and has always been a approach to that. That when we when we go to the base of the pyramid, when we provide access to capital and finance to small businesses, amazing things can happen. I think the kind of turning point is thinking about, well, actually, there's a huge demographic for whom getting access to those types of services not all that available, and actually they're much earlier in their entrepreneurial journey than individuals in already established MSMEs or SMEs. A young person entering the job market, 18 years old, looking for that job, and seeing a path potentially towards starting a small business, it's not always entirely clear what that small business is, or how they can actually, go about that. The school system hasn't prepared them for this world that they're entering into. But they have huge potential when they start to walk that path. And so I think it's almost sort of saying, well, look, we sort of know that getting right to the individuals building micro business is a massive lever for growth. But there's the scale of that actually is much, much, much bigger because there's all these young people every single year entering the workforce trying to navigate that path. And so I think looking at that as an opportunity to fuel development, but also to drive a viable business model and additional viable business models for our audiences is kind of where we started to brainstorm around. So I don't think it was a single aha moment. It was more, kind of thinking about the model and then thinking about the scale of the challenge and then trying to understand, how we marry the two.
Great. So basically sort of almost gradually builds up to the point where there's a clear understanding that there was this opportunity that could be addressed, right?
Absolutely. Right. Yeah.
So again, coming back to your conversation and the presentation you made at TED, you argue that the biggest barrier can be, psychological, the feeling of being jobless or unemployed. And we know this is an idea or a state of mind or a reality that permeates much of our society, where, as you pointed out, 1 million young people are coming into, essentially the job market every year. So when you say when identity shifts, behavior shifts, how did you discover that identity? And more importantly, that more than capital formal training, it can be the greatest lever for growth when it comes to all these young people coming into essentially the working space in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So I think I would sort of clarify something there. I don't know if I'd say that the biggest barrier is psychological. I do agree that the biggest lever for income growth, and when I say biggest lever, I mean, you know, one that can be applied the quickest and at scale is identity. I think there are many barriers young people face, and with varying degrees of challenges. Identity, the story they're told, and the unhelpful identity that they're given by society being one of, I'm expected to get this job, and I don't. It's impossible for me to get it, and now what? Equally, access to markets, access to skills, access to capital. But when we started to try and understand, well, where can we have the most, on this journey for a young entrepreneur, where we started to realize we can have the most immediate impact at scale by focusing initially on that identity piece. And that concept essentially that, hey, there is another pathway towards improving income. And if you're able to model that by demonstrating like, hey, here are a million other people just like you on the same journey, and here are the things that they're doing that help them move their income from here to here in a short period of time. I mean, that shift means you start to apply those things very quickly, and we see that happen all the time with our audience. And so, we definitely see this lever. I think as you correctly put it. It's not the silver bullet as well. There are other barriers that we look to try and address and solve, but it is a huge lever that can lead to very quick, tangible income improvements for young people.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a concept I call, or rather, I read about once called the mental model. The mental model you build of the world often defines your reality. And if the mental model you come from perceives a formal job as a definition of progress or success, and then you're able to reframe that in terms of how you perceive the world and how you sit in it. Once you shift that, typically, that changes everything. So I almost would describe it as, these are people who have to kind of readjust their mental model of what it means to be successful or productive away from the traditional stereotypical model, and then become this person who sees themselves as being, capable and full of potential and actually able to go out in the world and do something meaningful and, of course, rewarding financially and otherwise, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if society has only ever told you that success looks like one thing, and that path is just not available to you through no fault of your own, that's an incredibly tough pill to swallow. And it's a reality. It's a stark reality that individuals face oftentimes after they've invested in,
Yeah.
Getting a degree. They've put the time, they've put the money. And this promise of this big vision of, the job will be waiting for me on the other side isn't there. But there's an internal narrative that follows that. And that can sometimes be paralyzing. And it can sometimes be, very challenging for individuals who are also carrying the pressure of family expectations, et cetera. But I think there's this idea of, but there is another path, right? And that path is a pathway to success and income, and defined in other terms, and that can be incredibly motivating, and it can be you can start to see a lot of shift in behavior and movement when that's just when you shine a bit of a spotlight on it.
Great. So I want to get a bit more tangible around, kind of, how you build this identity framework into Mesh, right? Looking at the product, looking at the platform. And you had this TED talk, which I believe has done really well, and many people have been talking about it, where you talked about a persona or one of your users called Brian, who was a teacher turned entrepreneur from your talk. And in this particular context, you were basically saying that 78% of users start or improve a business within months of joining. So their skill sets, their capabilities, possibly even that self-identity sort of becomes much more reinforced. And then beyond just connecting people, you've also architected the platform to systematically cultivate this shift in identity. Are there any specific UI or UX choices, profile building prompts or community features designed to make someone stop seeing themselves as unemployed and start seeing themselves as possibly the CEO of one, their little hustle business, but now they see themselves as a leader, as a front runner, as somebody, breaking that stereotype and becoming a productive member of society, but also at the same time, highly rewarded and well compensated as well through their personal efforts.
Yeah, 100%. We did a lot of work on this. So, and it sits into different buckets. I think there are brand levers, there are product levers, there's a whole range of things that we look to apply. We actually worked very early on in with some experts in group social identity theory, and it's this sort of idea that um, you know when you're able to create a group identity, and we started to see our audience start to do that themselves. At some point, they started to refer to themselves as meshers. We're not users of mesh, we're meshers. And it was very interesting to see, well, we could start to model the behavior of what it means to be a mesher. And our audience were starting to also do that themselves. And that started to look like, hey, like successful meshers, they do things like, starting a business. They share their knowledge with others. They, potentially tend to put some savings away. There's a certain set of, they treat this as a serious space with which to, build their profile and build their credentials. And we began to kind of signal that, I think, not only in terms of, the content that we featured and how we featured successful young people and shared that with the community. We also really were intentional about building a brand that was not a sort of cold network, but an actual community where individuals belong to this group. And I think the last piece is when we looked at the kind of product and the onboarding, very subtle things like, what are the questions we ask? We don't actually ask you what's your education and what job did you have when you're setting up a profile in Mesh. We ask you, what's your business? What's your hustle? What skills are you looking to learn? What could you offer to the community? What are you looking for the community? We really did a lot of work with our audience to understand how they want to show up in the platform and what's most useful for them. And we built the profile information, the product rails, the brand identity, the content strategy around really like highlighting and amplifying what it means to be a young micro entrepreneur in the informal economy, and to be able to create that space where individuals can kind of belong to that and follow that journey.
Now, I've had a bit of proximity to, your mothership, your organization, Shujaz, which is, I think, an affiliated business as well. And I think one of the things that I always admired about that is that ability to tap into the cultural nuances, the colloquial language, the use of kind of like personas and characters that resonate with this younger, informal sector community. And I'm just curious about UX because, of course, my day job is around a marketing agency in the digital space. And, we're always talking about how do you create something that's resonant and relevant and sort of honest to this audience. And I'm just really asking as an outsider because I've never really used Mesh myself. But is that something that you're able to plug in so that they really started to feel like a sense of ownership, the style and tone of communication, probably a lot of colloquial language? Is that something that has been a key component or a key enabler in terms of that adoption and sense of ownership, which I believe is almost a natural line connecting back to the kind of things that within the broader collective you're done with Shujaz as well, which of course is a well-known brand in Kenya.
100%. So I think, my co-founder, Rob, is the founder of Shujaz. So I think when we started Mesh, he brought a lot of that experience into us building those rails and, building on some of those insights of learnings from him building that business. Equally, when we started to build out the strategy and we started to build out the brand, we did a lot of very, very intentional work with our audience, and from everything from for example, the language we use, what our view is on how we the types of content we feature, making sure that content is always authentic, making sure that we are always featuring young people, for example, who are the advice that we featured comes from them. It's the best. One of our core insights is young people you know, they want to learn, but they do not want to be taught. And the
Mm.
best person to learn from is someone who is not 100 steps ahead of you or 10 steps ahead of you. It's a micro entrepreneur 2 steps ahead of you. Who's basically that thing that you're struggling with. They struggled with it a month ago and they figured out a solution to it. And so they're going to share that with you. It's deeply practical and it's in your language. And we kind of have our own radar and our own guidelines for types of content we feature and we don't. We often say if there's content on the platform that's not immediately usable, immediately practical, it doesn't put money in the pocket of our audience tomorrow, then we're just we're just eating their bundles
Yeah.
for no reason. So we really intentionally have created a content engine, a set of brand rails, a set of guidelines for ourselves on how we maintain that authenticity and relatability and practicality for our audience.
Fantastic. So I want to jump into the concept of the jungle gym, right? And this is something I believe that you innovated or came up with, where you found that formal learning modules didn't work. I think you just alluded to that people don't want to be taught, they want to learn. And this is where the peer-to-peer learning has sort of really exploded on the platform. And I think this is where, again, that peer-to-peer model really works with the jungle gym, where 66% of your users report that learning, a skill from a peer has more validation, more contextual relevance than being taught. And I think this is fascinating but hard to scale. So how does the product facilitate this effectively? Are we talking about maybe something similar to Reddit, which is a forum driven platform, as we know, TikTok style feed of 90-second clips, so the short form snackable content, perhaps structured group chats? How do you surface the right just in time knowledge for the right user, and how do you incentivize these experienced measures to share what they know?
It's an excellent question. So the user interface is a bit of a combination of those things. We found that the best is to have sort of mixed media, mixed format type content. So articles, listicles, short form reels. Our audience, when we have multiple reels together, they started to sort of call it mini series. So for example, instead of a course or a module, you'd have like a sales mini series that drops, which is maybe a bit of a role play between individuals on how to, understand what your customer is looking for, how to get through to a sale. And that sits in the platform in sort of like a feed, and content is structured almost like a combination of I think of sort of a Reddit style format. So there's
Yeah.
content structured through groups based on like individual contributions, and then we have in there reels and mini videos and sort of content repositories that people can access. Our ability to scale it and our ability to sort of further scale it sits in an increasing ability for us to be able to match young people to that content in a better and better way. So today and historically that content has been very we sort of manually segment how we reach categories of our audience with specific content. Increasingly, our work and our ambition with Mesh is to leverage the data. This is really the underlying principle of Mesh. Leverage the data that's accumulating in the platform, not to keep people, doom scrolling for forever on like political videos and cat memes, but to really productively match them to the content that they need when they need it in a way that puts the most money in their pocket. And that's a combination of content. It's a combination of connecting them to networks. It's a combination of connecting them to opportunities. And so data is a huge part of our strategy. The front end and the UI UX sort of is evolving over time as we see, how our audience behaves and the types of things that are most appealing to them, and where the most impact is kind of driven. In terms of how we incentivize and engage our Mesh members, there's a few components of that. So one, there's like an intrinsic motivation, which is to be seen. When you contribute and you provide great advice in the platform, that builds your reputation and your credibility. It's providing you with social capital. It's something that may enable you to earn a badge that sits on your profile as a top voice or a top contributor, these types of things. And then there's another aspect where if we are going to take that user-generated content, we are constantly featuring measures from our platform where we create, featured content for them, then then of course like they're rewarded financially for doing like a full feature, or being a content creator where we may create a full detailed video on them. So there's sort of content that we create that features individuals, and there's content that our individuals sort of create themselves, where the ambition for them is to create new networks, or to, I mean, similar to how we might post on LinkedIn, gain more visibility or establish expertise, that kind of stuff.
Fantastic. I have to imagine that the majority of your usage is on smartphones, just as a reality, I presume, given the demographic and the audience that you're engaging with. And then on the same note, I just imagine that, just as you're talking about the content and how the content is sort of multifaceted and multi-packaged, that I imagine that there's some element of that famous word nowadays called AI, where possibly when you talk about data driven, there's some sort of algorithmic matchmaking happening in the background. Is that something that maybe you can talk to us a little bit about, like how maybe you're using some sort of algorithm that aligns content with somebody's level of utilization, or the gamification with the leaderboards or something? I don't know. I'm just curious about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so it's 100% part of the underlying strategy for us. Actually, what we're increasingly encouraged by is, like, to date, we've been manually matching our audience to one another and
Oh, okay.
testing the underlying components of what type of content works best for what type of individuals. We're now building out. We've launched recently a new version of our platform. We really built this engine to align to what our audience are really doing, and to rebuild kind of like our underlying data architecture. And that sets us up now down a path of being able to sort of leverage the data and leverage AI, doing increasing capability. And it sits in a couple of different spaces. One is about, matching and content discovery. And increasingly now there's a use case that we're piloting and working on. And I'm sure you hear this from a number of organizations, but in the generative AI space. So
Okay.
thinking now of how can we create really personalized mentorship and coaching experiences for our audience, where you can get to very specific questions. And so we've run a few pilots and are now looking to kind of, I think the next chapter and phase of Mesh is going to move from a pure matching content driven, let's get you the video you need or the article you need, to uh, a generative AI focused personal coaching, business coach type environment, supplemented by real, authentic peers, peer conversations, peer groups, really rooted in practicality, but all in local language. All of our stuff is in um, Shang and Swahili, and we say Kenyanese. Whatever our audience speaks, that's how we provide the content back. But super relevant. And there's a massive opportunity there, because when we've run pilots, for example, if you get questions like, I'm a peanut farmer in Kajiado and I'm looking to grow my income from 8,000 shillings up. I mean, that level of specificity just in that one conversational
Mm.
um, arrangement allows you to really sort of deeply provide a level of feedback and content and pointing to peers and groups, that you may not have been possible for us to do a year ago, 2 years ago. So we're definitely very excited about where we're working right now on live pilots, things like AI financial literacy readiness coaches, AI business coaches, um,
Wow.
to help young people really, on a super personalized level, build on all the insights of Mesh, peer-led mentorship, authentic, trusted voice, and use the data that we've accumulated to kind of feed that back in a super personalized way.
That sounds very impressive, very ambitious. I think it'll unlock the ability to scale ridiculously well once that's fully operational. So,
Absolutely.
really looking forward to seeing what that looks like when you get there. I
Thanks.
want to go a little bit more into your third lesson on trust. That possibly is the most groundbreaking aspect of the TED conversation you had recently. And in the informal sector, really, what we're seeing is that trust is everything. And you found that the key attribute is being serious. You say Mesh helps users build visible, trusted identities online. This is essentially the holy grail. How do you translate an abstract concept like seriousness or social capital into a tangible, digital signal on a user's profile? And is it a review system? Is it a vouching score? Is it a score based on community contributions? And critically, how do you protect this system from manipulation or gamification by bad actors as well?
Yeah, I mean, all excellent questions. So I think even that concept is like there's no silver bullet, there's no one size solution fits all. It's a journey, right? And I think there's an aspect of this where the initial phases of that journey are could we help young people to showcase themselves and their business in a way? Could we create an environment where that facilitates them to engage and trade and interact with one another? And we started to see that happen almost organically, even without us building those product rails. So we started to see things like credentials and badges on profiles as being an unlocker for credibility. We started to see actually trust in brand and the space that we were in, helping to unlock aspects of credibility and peer to peer. We see huge opportunity like going forward for actually building out these more robust QA rating systems. So in the way that you described, so endorsements and peer reviews as a way for individuals to be able to rate one another. That trust that we're looking to build kind of fits into two buckets. How do we build and facilitate trust peer to peer? And how do we also build and facilitate trust, from an individual metric to a corporate partner in ways that they can see and recognize and create these new sort of trusted relationships? Um, Part of that sits in what is visible in your profile, right? Your activity, your history, your posts, etc. Part of that sits in an underlying, behavior in the background. So, and we're beginning to work with some of these models and signals. So, working with a partner to understand when we link a young entrepreneur into an earning opportunity, a gig opportunity, or into a financial service or financial product, what are the things happening in the background that are silent signals of trust, or trustworthiness, right? Is it things like the courses they take? If you've taken a financial literacy, mini series, does that facilitate better knowledge and better subsequent repayment? Or the trade that's occurred, or the previous gigs they've taken, the language they use, the session length, the strength of their network, the endorsements of their network. So not all of this is fully built out. I mean, this is a longer product roadmap and journey for us, but we started to see these organic green shoots and signals occur in the platform between peer-to-peer trade, and a lot of really key, interesting lessons and insights as we plug individuals into opportunities. And we now want to basically build digital histories in a more robust way and create this digital identity asset basically that can be leveraged by our audience to open up new opportunities. So what that looks like will evolve over time. It's definitely a function of kind of like testing, product evolution, piloting, a range of different things.
Great. So one of the things I want to talk to you about is kind of like the growth trajectory of Mesh, because I think by the time you did your TED talk, you mentioned about 800,000 users. The latest numbers show over 1 million active monthly users on Mesh. That sounds like a pretty significant jump of about 200,000 users. And I'm just curious to understand, what's driving the acceleration in growth? Are you seeing network effects are finally kicking in? Where the value of the platform is sort of growing as each user comes in. So what are the key drivers behind kind of like the current growth that we're seeing on the platform?
I think for us, we sort of quickly realized that there's a huge white space, a massive underserved need that sits in, what is our lead kind of hook for our audience, which is really practical, relatable content in the way that I've described. And so we did very well at kind of building out this content bank, getting better and better at digital marketing and SEO, and having teaser content that drives our audience in. We've then started to see an increase in organic growth and users starting to come in, you know, for that proposition and others as they enter the platform. We recently, I think, in dipsticks and surveys, we've had like a net promoter score of 87 amongst our audience. And I think close to 80% of our base says they can't get these services anywhere else. So we started to realize, we're onto something here. And that growth, I think it's really driven by providing this, service that puts more money in their pocket. I mean, that's ultimately the value proposition. Um, and so, you know, in how we advertise that, in how we market it, and how we make it super authentic, I think we occupy a space that not many others do. And so that sort of uniqueness of that proposition is driving a lot of our growth. The other side of it as well is recently we also launched a new version of our platform, and we realized version one of our platform was all the ways we thought our audience would use the product. Version two of the platform is all the ways built for all the ways they actually use the product, and that saw us have a big spike and increase as well because we really optimized for performance, we optimized for you know the um, the capacity of their devices, the specific devices that they use. We really tried to make it a quicker and better experience. And when we did that, it kind of just, the improved experience also helped us continue to scale and generate more usage.
Okay, so what I'm hearing that the signals there were, I think, a better user experience, more aligned to the requirements, and then obviously that, I suppose some elements of virality kicked in as well amongst the stakeholders who are benefiting from the same. Which probably
Yeah.
brings me to my next question in the most important way, I think, which is the business model. How does Mesh actually make money? Is it a freemium model, transaction fees? Are you building a B2B data services play for the formal sector? So really, at the end of the day, how do you build a sustainable business on a user base with variable and often limited income? And over the years, as somebody who's been involved in the sort of digital ecosystem in Kenya, I've seen so many startups come in, and the reality at the end of the day is you're looking at the population here is really, from a financial standpoint, has limited resources. But yeah, I'm just curious to understand how you actually make money.
I mean, I completely agree with this. I think this is often the case when you look at models operating in Kenya, across sub-Saharan Africa, emerging markets, right? Especially when you think about models like ours, or any tech-driven model, really, right? The underlying technology build out, the underlying infrastructure costs, the underlying operating costs, all of these things, um, you know, the cost structures are very, very similar, whether you're building in another market or you're building here. Sometimes there are some additional barriers that you actually need to unpack and uncover. But equally, your core audience has kind of limited purchasing power. We thought about this and really looked at our model by saying, look, Mesh will be free to use for our audience. So none of our Mesh members, it's free. You can sign up, create a profile, you can engage in content. We then looked at like the building blocks of the business model and the revenue pillar, and we said, how do we deeply tie this to the services that basically two customers bases that we serve need? Our corporates who want to engage the informal economy. This is a huge source of growth for them. It's customers, like similar to sort of my experience when I was in, mobile money and telco. These are not only customers, but they're also, distributors, points on our value chain, et cetera. And we know that our audience needs services from the formal world. And so our business model sits in how we work with and partner and charge corporates for gaining access to the base. So it's a question of things like success fees for successful onboarding of gig workers, these types of things. It's digital advertising and marketing for corporate partners. And it's revenue shares for providing access to products and services. So connecting a fintech or a bank to a young person and providing access to loans or savings, we charge the corporate partner a share, and so that's where that's where the financial model and the business model kind of sits. It's in the corporate side of the equation. Yeah.
Okay, so they essentially finance the operations as far as revenues and activities are concerned, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important for us, I think, to really build those out in a very precise way, because a platform like this, there's lots of potential opportunities to monetize. We can see even downstream, more opportunities to monetize. Our long-term strategy sits in, how do we deeper embed finance or deeper embed payments, or it's a whole range of things you can do with a platform play. But we're really, really focused right now on building out these revenue pillars one by one. And kind of meeting the most pressing needs of both corporates and our audience to be able to get that done.
So, basically, Mesh has some really impressive impact metrics. I think 78% of your users are starting or improving a business. 49% are now earning from other Mesh members, which is incredible in terms of the community is actually building its own sustainability within itself. And I'm wondering, how do you track and validate these numbers? Are these self-reported? Are you able to track this behavior on the platform itself? How do you actually determine that these are actually tangible and credible numbers on the platform?
So we've worked considerably with partners. A lot of our work and a lot of our partnerships, in especially in the early kind of building of Mesh, has been through partnerships with organizations like UK government, Gates Foundation, others, um, and we and even sort of private. So we've worked with Unilever, Microsoft, and a few others. And part of this is really understanding how we're able to measure these things. And so we've built very kind of robust measurement and evaluation frameworks for how we measure the impact, and that's delivered through surveys with like baselines and end lines, and so that's really how we've done the measurement to date. Over time, we understand that there's so much value in that behavior in that data in and of itself, and it's really helped us, those data points, to show where the economic activity is happening within the platform. And our question now is, well, in our value proposition, how do we help turbocharge that economic activity and capture the data and be able to sort of measure that and use that as an asset for our audience? So when we talk about things like our audience starting to trade with another, how do we facilitate that trade? Because it's happening right now organically, individuals DMing one another and taking their transactions, offline. But how do we sort of support that framework? So over time, we'll begin to collect, through embedded payments or through embedded finance, we'll begin to collect a lot more of that data internally, and use that as like an additional asset to help build more trust and help build more partnerships and help kind of expand access in more and more ways.
Yeah. So you also talk a lot about the massive opportunity for the formal business world. Leaders, lenders, corporates to use these new models of trust. And I'm just wondering, are you working actively on partnerships with banks and other institutions to pilot maybe using Mesh's social capital data to underwrite loans or find talent? And what does that conversation with a traditional bank's risk officer look like? And I know that particularly for the youth, this is a conversation I've seen many times, especially in businesses involved in the fintech space, where the ability to credit score or to validate a potential loanee using a non-typical credit scoring models is one of the biggest challenges, because they don't really have a credit history. Not to mention, many continue to be unbanked in the conventional sense. So I'm just curious how you're sort of navigating that space, and whether Mesh could almost become this trusted platform, which by proxy then creates these unconventional ways of providing some form of credit scoring or trust signals that a bank could use when they're considering making loans to some of these businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we're working with fintechs. We have a pipeline of banks that we're working with and speaking to, running pilots and experiments to basically determine, how do we best leverage their assets and ours to unlock barriers to access to capital and credit for a demographic that needs it. I think 17% of our base, when we speak to them, have access to formal loan in the last year. 74% say that they actually have a demand for accessing a formal financial service. In Kenya, it's like a $19.4 billion a year unmet credit
Wow.
demand. We see it as a massive underlying barrier to young people's ability to grow and improve their businesses and generate more economic activity. Most of these individuals, unfortunately, they're thin profile or no profile. How do you, as a financial institution, make your decision or take that bet on a young person? So our ambition is to say, yeah, we're going to work together and we're going to help banks make better decisions with more data. But also, that's not something that we expect, nor have seen individuals are going to jump at and trust this alternative data overnight. I think a lot of individuals have looked at how to sort of leverage this data, and we think that essentially it's not just about creating alternative credit scores. there's what we sort of call a wraparound experience. Like that those additional data points in and of themselves are not enough. You can't only have those alternative data points without a few other things. So yes, you always will need transactional data, and there's aspects of getting that through third parties and through sort of existing and new products and services that we can see, you know, embedded in mesh. But equally, we look at our strategy around how we work with banks as like, well, hold on a second. There's a systemic challenge here, right? We can't just blindly provide credit to people, even if we have these additional data points. We have to first support young people to get credit ready. And so there's a component of, financial literacy. There's a component of, business readiness. There's a component of like not every young person is ready or even needs credit that might be applying to loans in the open market. How do we help our audience make better decisions about their credit needs and be ready to service those credit needs? The second pillar is, working with banks and their risk teams and fintechs through pilots to lend on their existing criteria. So, make your decisions as you might normally do. And then, with a, clever team of data scientists in the background to say, hey, what are the alternative data points? People who tend to repay tend to watch these courses or network in this way, or, have a history of over 6 months on the platform. These types of alternative data points. And then the third kind of key component of our strategy is that, there's a huge problem when young people take capital or credit, I think, in the open market. They're kind of just left to service that loan on their own. And I think one of the biggest levers for supporting access and better repayment rates and, financial including this demographic is to say, how do we support you to make that credit as productive as it possibly can be? So when you get a loan, can we connect you to discounted products or services? Can we put you in a group of other borrowers, and so you can share best tips and tricks on how to manage your repayment and predict your repayment ability? Can you be proactive with the lender if maybe there's some seasonality in your business or there's an issue? And so this type of additional support. I think we've also seen pretty well proven that social and community levers, when you lend into groups, are huge levers of positive repayment. They'd be like 30% improvements in positive repayment. How do we scale that? Right? So I think we look at Mesh as a big community. How do we leverage the nature of this community and the peer support and the peer accountability, right? To be able to support repayment. And that's the area where we're working with fintechs. We're looking to increasingly work with banks, and we have partners that are interested in piloting some of these things with us to be able to build out. And really, that's a big focus for us over the next 12 to 18 months is building out those relationships, those financial integrations, and the use of the data to be able to unlock capital for this segment that needs it and can use it really effectively to grow their businesses.
And that's brilliant because that almost has to mimic some of the famous chama movements in Kenya, the savings groups, the cooperatives, and the cooperatives and that movement and the way it sort of mobilized financing for so many things at a personal and business level for entrepreneurs and even just families. So I think, yeah, the fact that you can sort of bring those dynamics into this model, I think is fantastic. And I think it takes cognizance of kind of the reality on the ground and how things already operate. And the fact that when you're part of that collective, there's almost this collective responsibility around making sure you're paying your loans, the sort of social pressure that comes with not conforming, and potentially the fallout if we are all not together doing this the right way. So that's brilliant. I think that's an incredible opportunity that going forward. So one of the things I want to also explore with you is just, the fact that your mission involves kind of like shifting these deeply entrenched mindsets around how things work, and not just amongst young people within the formal sector, but also across the board in terms, the biggest misconception being the resistance you encounter from corporations, policymakers, investors, when you sort of advocate for fueling the informal economy instead of formalizing. And I think you've sort of alluded to some of this already, but can you go a little bit deeper into that? How do you overcome resistance to what Mesh is trying to accomplish, again, within some of this formal side of things?
I think we're starting to see some shifts. I think there's two components of this. I think when we think about formal institutions, whether it's like investment, people with sort of specific investment hypothesis, or people with sort of thinking about programmatically, how do we think about how we grow incomes of young people. I think the mental model is shifts to jobs. I mean, fundamentally, it shifts to jobs, and I think it's not often thought of in terms of work and livelihoods. And I think that you know when and that filters all the way down, that those mental models of what it means to train someone, grow income, you know build into job pipelines. um a lot of the time they're not uh, conscious of either the inherent barriers that sit in the informal economy, or actually the potential energy that exists in the informal economy as a whole. And I think our goal is to kind of say, hey, before we get to jobs, of course, jobs are important. There's all this lost opportunity left on the table because we're so focused on that aspect of the market and not saying, like, how do we turbocharge what young people are already doing today? They are finding their solutions, right? They are figuring things out. They are building their businesses. They're incredibly resilient. They're incredibly adaptive. They're, incredibly innovative in terms of how they think about, building and growing their businesses. If we turbocharge that, we will get to those other outcomes. And I think, I honestly think it's a function sometimes of just blinders, of like not being conscious. We all sort of go back to what we know, right? And if you're
Yeah.
coming at it from a formal approach, it's not a conscious thing. It's just, I'm going to think about it from a lens of what I know. Um, the other side we've seen from like a corporate angle is really interesting for us. We learned very early that it is a, almost easier to get a lot of young people to adapt to what corporates may be looking for a gig or for an offer or service, than it is to get the formal world to adapt to the informal sector. There is, when you think about taking a financial product or a gig product or a retail product, and you think about applying that to these millions of young entrepreneurs, that often means facing some uncomfortable truths about, what does that mean for my core systems? What does that mean for my business process? What does that mean for my level of risk and criteria for bringing individuals on board? What does it mean for my communication and explaining my offer, my price points, the tailoring of my product? And I think a lot of corporates see the informal economy as a huge opportunity, and almost sort of take a more formal focused offer and sort of
Mm,
point it at the informal economy and say, okay, we'll wait for you to formalize and come to us. We'll wait for you to meet our criteria.
mm,
Um, and as opposed to saying, well, actually, we're gonna try and shift our criteria. We're gonna try and shift our model and see if we can meet young people where they are. Um, and that is it's an investment and it's a process. I think and what we're sort of trying to show is like, hey, there's a return on that investment. There is a massive return on that investment, both from a financial incentive, economic, component, but also equally from an impact component. Um, and that's something that we hope that our platform, in many respects, will be that source of insight, but also that actual practical connecting tissue and plumbing to make those things happen, between corporates and between our audience, in a way that, like, creates this positive flywheel. Um, yeah.
So one of the things you've also talked about is how you can link, building more resilient economies that reward contribution over consumption, and especially in a world facing climate change and inequality, as we know. Can you expand on that? And, how does a platform like yours that empowers micro entrepreneurs in Kenya connect to these massive global challenges? Because on one hand, is this sort of micro focus, there are these global issues, and then being able to sort of bring the two together in a sort of a very practical way.
I think that, I mean, there's no world where we can think about, um, things like, whether climate change or, massive pressing global challenges, that doesn't fundamentally need to operate with, in partnership with young people in the informal economy. I mean, we're talking about, like 85% of economic activity. You're talking about, billions of individuals, not just across sub-Saharan Africa, but across, emerging markets all over the world, that are navigating their income growth and improvement in the informal sector. And there's huge opportunity, right, for us to be able to create. And let's, if we take the idea of, climate as one, there's huge opportunity for us to say, how do we create, improve livelihoods by connecting these international markets or international initiatives to young people on ground who can be doing that work. So whether that is things like citizen science, or it's things like connecting young people into the green economy or circular economy, whether it's encouraging and showing how to's of like, how do we connect improved distribution for solar initiatives through engaging salespeople, young people,
Yeah.
solar installers, technicians. I mean, you can't escape the fact that, like, if you want to go last mile to the most people, right, it runs through the informal sector. And that's a huge opportunity. And so we're actually working on some initiatives right now in partnership with Shell Foundation and a few others on how do we connect young people to, income generating opportunities in the green sector. And how do we do that really, really practically, where we're generating improved incomes, but also, contributing towards, massive global challenges. So yeah, that's kind of how we see it. I think regardless of what you're thinking about, regardless of the sector, whether you think, green, whether you think agri, whether you think financial services, health, whatever it is, this demographic are stakeholders. And all along the way, I think there's ways that you can connect, again, formal to informal, in so many different ways to make, to basically, make these initiatives work better and at scale.
No, I love the way you did that, especially when you're thinking about, for instance, like the last mile, the fact that the informal sector is incredibly good at playing a role in those spaces, which is really, as we say in Kenya, on the ground. So, I think that's brilliant. So as we're coming to the end of our conversation, I just wanted to touch base on a couple more things. Number one, what these enduring misconceptions, after all this work, what do you think is still the most persistent and helpful stereotype about the hustle economy that you wish you could dismantle once and for all?
I mean, I think we sort of mentioned it in this just fundamental thrust of the TED Talk, which is like the informal economy isn't a problem to be fixed; it's an engine to fuel. And I think when we say that, and sort of tying into the conversation that we've had today, it's not to say that there aren't, generating jobs in manufacturing or these other sectors, and generating, improving jobs over time is not something that we want to do. It's so important for future growth and economic development. But the way we approach that is actually through the informal sector, through bottom-up investment and facilitating and enabling this generation of young entrepreneurs, not to say, like, well, there'll be a job waiting for you in 25, 30, 50 years, but, we're going to support you to build your businesses and improve your income tomorrow. And we're going to keep doing that over and over and over again. And by kind of, meeting you where you are, understanding and recognizing the opportunity, turbocharging the businesses that you build, and ultimately that growth is going to lead to better and improved economic activity for everyone, but also like a huge commercial opportunity for individuals immediately who want to serve this demographic. So I think it kind of goes back to that main core thrust. Like, the informal economy is an engine to be fueled, and there's huge opportunity to do that. But it requires rethinking models and really investing in rethinking some of those models.
Fantastic. And as we come to the end of our conversation, for the young listener or person watching this right now who's living in their own jungle gym journey, maybe they just graduated, maybe they can't just find a job, or they're running a small business from their phone. What's the one piece of advice you would give them today?
That's a great question. I think what I would say is that I am not the person to give them that advice. I actually think that, like, don't take advice from someone who's not lived that journey and is living that journey that you're living. I think we would hope and say that, like, there is a whole community of your peers walking the same path as you and are figuring these things out on a day-to-day basis. And whether that is like how you keep basic bookkeeping, or, to be able to sort of take an asset to the bank, or how you, build your particular relevant sales skills and do that in a super practical way, or how you manage, building your business model for the next kiosk you want to open, or whatever that looks like for you. right? um, I think that that there's someone who is on that path that can give you more practical advice than I could ever give you. Hopefully, you find them on Mesh. Equally, I think you'll find them all around you. But I don't think that I think given everything we know is like uh, someone sitting here in the formal world, right, trying to provide you that practical advice. I'm not that person to give you that advice. But hopefully we can connect you to someone to give you that advice. And whether you find that on Mesh or you find that in your own community, I think that peer to peer aspect of it is so crucial and so important.
And maybe as we sort of come to the end, my last question to you would be: how can people find you? How can they find Mesh? Whether that's from a potential user perspective, whether it's potential partnerships or businesses, organizations that would like to work with you. How can they get plugged in with Mesh and also reach you directly?
So, through our website, so mesh.co.ke, equally our LinkedIn page. So for corporate partners, mesh.life is our app. So for young people who want to, visit the platform, create a profile, sign up, start accessing content, that's where you can find us. And Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. So, Anuj, this has really been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for sharing so much in this 1 hour or so that we've spoken. I think the way you've sort of converged technology and business and then, made it locally relevant or contextually relevant to the markets in Kenya and Africa. And I think it's a powerful reminder. The thing that I think you kept saying is that it's not about making the informal formal. It's about essentially looking at the informal as its own thing and then taking those nuances and those realities into kind of like a way that you can make it work for you, make it work for the partners, make it work for the stakeholders in a way that really is interesting and really delivers value to all the different stakeholders. And I think that's one of the things that I've taken away from this today. But thank you so much for joining us on Pure Digital Passion. It's a pleasure, and we're looking forward to seeing everything that you're doing at Mesh going forward and this incredible growth trajectory that it's going through right now.
Thank you so much, Moses. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me and letting us share our story. Appreciate it.